The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, good morning. My name is Lance French. I'm the Business Development Manager for W&M Environmental, and I would like to welcome you to our webinar on stormwater compliance in practice. Our experts for today is W&M's Division Manager, Jennifer Adams, and from our San Antonio office, Vanessa Coleman. Welcome, ladies.
Thanks, Lance.
Very good. Thanks for joining us. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. If you have questions, please send them to me through our chat tab on your GoToWebinar window, and we'll make sure that your questions get to Jennifer and Vanessa, and we'll get an answer to you as soon as possible. We are recording this webinar, and it will be available to rewatch on our website. I can't even talk this morning. Website soon, along with the slides. And I'll get that email to you with the link tomorrow, because we are actually broadcasting in Austin, Texas. And so we have a traveling show now, and it's awesome. We're on location now. So okay. So we're going to get started with just introducing our presenters. So Jennifer.
Yes.
How long have you been doing stormwater or environmental consulting?
Well, I worked in the ready mix aggregate cement area for about 8 years, and I did some work for a piping and plumbing company before that. And then I've been with W&M for almost 4 years now, I believe. The time is just flying. So that's my background. I've done a lot of stormwater presentations and SWIPs, etc., for all of my former lovely ready mix plants.
I was just said that I need to fix the slideshow, so y'all are seeing me instead. So I need to figure that out. So,
no one wants to see that.
Sorry about that. There we go. Hopefully that's better. I'm going to get a text here in a second.
Getting a preview, yeah.
I know. So okay, this works for me. So hopefully what they're not seeing is, yep, there's another video. So sorry. See, our traveling show is not working out so well for us today. So, I just got one that said perfect. Okay, so
awesome.
Sorry about that. Go. Okay. What were you saying? Sorry.
Oh, I'm done.
Okay, you're done. Okay,
yeah, done.
So Vanessa, you're kind of new to W&M. How long have you been with W&M?
Since January.
Since January. Mm-hmm. I can do the math. That's like 6 months. So welcome aboard. So we got you into the webinar rotation actually quite early. So are you excited? I can tell.
Yeah.
Okay.
We are thrilled.
And so tell us give us a little background on you. What have you been doing?
I've been in the industry for the past 13 years, supporting various industries: heavy manufacturing, semiconductor, recyclers, a whole bunch of different industries.
And I'm understanding that you actually did not go to Texas A&M.
This is true.
Okay.
One of the few.
I mean, for real. I think that's that breaks a record in a row that we've had. Actually, yeah, I think so. So
yeah.
Well, thank you for not being an Aggie.
My pleasure.
And where did you go again? I'm sorry.
University of Detroit Mercy.
All right, Michigan.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Nice. Are you from Michigan?
I'm not. South Texas.
Okay. Well, that's a story that we'll get into later. So, okay. So introduction. So I'm handing this off to Jennifer. So Jennifer, why are we talking about stormwater? This is one of the most popular webinars that we have. And it's kind of always surprised me. Yeah. Why is that?
Well, most industries, there's some caveats and exceptions, but most industries out there actually have a requirement to be covered under this stormwater permit. So this is the TCEQ's multi-sector general permit. It is the most wide-ranging stormwater permit that they have. They do renew it every 5 years, so that is a 5-year renewal date for everyone, not just for your specific site. But I know that it's a very big permit. There's lots of sectors. There's a lot to it. So people, it's really nice to have a conversation about what we do, what other people do to kind of make sure we're in compliance with all the requirements of the permit, because there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
That's why it's so big.
And it does seem to change from time to time.
It does. Every 5 years for sure. EPA will push stuff down. Lots of comments from industry and cities, etc. So yeah, lots of changes every 5 years.
Okay. Okay, so history.
So history, we're not going to bore you with a bunch of history today. We actually did this webinar 2 years ago, I believe, and this link, which Lance will send out, this link will link you up to that webinar that we did that kind of goes through the changes for this latest version, the latest 2016 version.
Okay. Yeah, and that was actually the record of most attendees we've ever had on a webinar. That's actually started our stardom. We were on the map. Okay. Who is regulated? Who's taking this one?
So the main piece of who is regulated here is your SIC code. So the permit's divided up into sectors, hence multi-sector general permit. And the sectors are divided up by similar industries, and that's based on your SIC code. So hopefully you know what your SIC code is if you're here. That is the bulk of the permit. There are also some industrial activity codes that are covered, and that's this sectors K, L, O, and T. So it's a TS if you're a TSDF, a landfill, steam electric power, wastewater treatment. That's also covered under the permit. You're required to get coverage under the permit. And then there's some instances where you can be designated by the executive director under the sector AD. You have to be designated though to get coverage under Sector AD. So your main piece here is that those SIC codes and knowing where you fall under the sectors.
And is there, I invented this term yesterday, is there any cross-sectorizations?
Cross-sectorization.
Like where you're in one sector, but then you kind of flirt with another sector?
Yes, so it depends on what's on your site. I know one of the examples I've seen is a cement plant that has an active mining site, an active ready-mix site on the same site. Same location. So they have to follow each of those locations, and their SWIP has to cover each of those sectors that that are applicable to the industries at that site.
Okay.
Yeah.
You concur, Vanessa?
Yeah.
I concur.
Yeah, I concur. So what is regulated? So essentially any activity where there's a potential for material to float off, leak, leach, and so it can be raw material, waste material, byproducts. So anything that has the potential to pollute stormwater.
So some of these pictures. So I'm kind of surprised. I'm looking at like the one on the top left there. There's a dumpster, and why is that on there?
Because
I'm dumb, but
because those dumpsters aren't welded completely. Completely, so there is a potential for material to, as it settles and as it is exposed to water, for the material to leach out of that dumpster or compactor.
Okay, and the pallets, same thing.
Well, pallets oftentimes are used to transport different products, and sometimes that product may have spilled, or there may be other debris on those pallets, or kind of tucked in between. And as that's sitting exposed to the elements, that material can then leach out of those pallets. Yeah.
See, I guess not doing stormwater permits all the time, I just would assume that that's just how your water drains off your property. I never would have thought about a lot of that stuff. I'm sure my audience is going, "Why are you?" But shut up.
I know a lot of people think that. I know legacy sites, especially when you purchase a site that's been around since the 50s, it was designed that way. It was designed for everything to drain off to the lowest point, and we've had to kind of retrofit and retroactively look at these sites to make sure they are following the permit, and that gets difficult with a 50-year-old site.
Okay, what is the most interesting thing that you've seen on a site that said, you know what, that's going to affect your stormwater? Anything come up to mind? Like, come on.
Most interesting.
I mean, just the things that you wouldn't have noticed. Like, oh, you know what? Hey, that's something new.
Well, I don't know that it's new. Maybe Vanessa has a much more interesting fact or example, but I know the trash compactors.
Yeah.
This kind of goes into the next slide too. But a trash compactor, you would think we have a site that all the industrial activity occurs indoors. So they went for a long time without a stormwater permit, just assuming, okay, everything's indoors. We are not exposed to stormwater. But they did have a trash compactor outside. And the more you sit and look at a trash compactor, the more you realize that the hydraulics leak, the trash leaks all around it, and that trash is part of their industrial material process. So they ended up getting a stormwater permit based on just the trash compactor, and that's it. It's kind of not interesting, but
No, it's pretty
important,
interesting. I would
important
never think
example,
of.
yeah, that you wouldn't necessarily realize.
And that's probably why people need help on doing some of these things, because
Right.
you want to
New
be
eyes
covered.
help,
And yeah,
yeah.
if you've been doing it for a number of years and you don't even think about my trash compactor,
Right.
you know,
Exactly.
you don't want to find out that it's wrong when you get
When
a fine.
TCQ shows
Right.
up, yeah.
So, okay, no exposure.
So this kind of goes along with that. So no exposure, there's a very specific definition in the permit that you have to meet to claim no exposure. And it's basically if all your industrial materials and activities are either indoors or protected by a storm resistant shelter. So really you're making sure that you don't have exposed industrial material and that it's covered by a shelter or it's all indoors. And if that is the case, you can claim this no exposure certification, and you actually have to claim it. You can't just say, oh, we don't have any exposure, so we're fine. If you're in one of those sectors or SIC codes, you have to submit this no exposure certification to the TCQ in order to claim it.
Okay, so
And it's not a lifetime guarantee. You have to do it every 5 years as the permit renews.
That's
okay,
true.
and so is anybody exempt from not doing? Because it seems like if you own a property, you have to submit a stormwater plan. I mean, is that
If your
So-
SIC code is listed,
If
yeah.
your SIC code is listed now, there is a section of the permit that has some details on if you don't have runoff. For example, if you discharge to a POTW and you're permitted to do that.
what is that?
Publicly owned treatment works.
Mhm.
That's right. Yeah. If you just discharge to a POTW, then you do not necessarily have to obtain a stormwater permit if you don't have any other stormwater running off site. If you basically contain it all on site. So there's a variety of conditions listed in the permit it's hard to do, but if you're designed to not discharge stormwater off site.
Okay, well, who would be not honest? I mean, who would not be?
I think the POTW is a good example. I know I've seen plants in the past that actually do discharge directly into that POTW, so that helps control their stormwater so it doesn't run, out an outfall or out their front driveway. So that's a good example of one.
Okay.
But you
Excellent.
do have to get a permit through the POTW. You don't just dump your water in the storm drain and think you're good.
Okay.
Yeah. And in light of kind of the topic of tips and tricks, in my experience, I've seen some people claim no exposure who really do have exposure, and other facilities that currently have exposure, but by making a few small changes can claim no exposure. One example that I know is, I had a facility where the majority of the operations was indoors. And over time, the operations that were outdoors, they started to build out and put shelter because they had a lot of weather, right? So that really impacted their business. So just over time, they started building roofs. Well, after that was completely built out, they really only had a small little boneyard. So talking to plant management, it's like, hey, let's just get rid of this junk that we know y'all are never going to use, and we can claim no exposure. And just like that, we have just gotten rid of a whole compliance with the whole program. You get out of sampling, you get out of doing inspections, you get out of having to train your employees on an annual basis. Now you're not completely out of the loop because you still have to get that reapply every 5 years. But other than that, I mean, it's worth taking a look at.
That's a lot of hours, man hours,
Yeah,
for sure.
A lot of
Absolutely.
paperwork.
Absolutely.
Okay, so are we done with the no exposure?
No exposure. Yep, we're good. Okay, so stormwater versus processed water. This is important to understand the difference because this permit has very limited non-stormwater discharges that it allows, which we'll talk about in a second. So I used to train a bunch of ready mix guys, and I think this makes the most sense in my head. It's the dry day. I call it the dry day test. And if you are on a site in the middle of Texas in August, you can assume there's no rain that day. So any water that you have sitting on that site that day when there's no rain would be usually considered processed water. And that's usually water from washing down trucks, water from any sort of water that doesn't come from the sky, basically. And then, of course, stormwater is rain, snow melt, not that we get that here, ice, etc., that falls on your site and runs through industrial material. That's your stormwater.
So a car wash would be processed
Processed
okay.
water. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have a question to the
Oh, we
audience.
do.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
A poll question. So for those of you who are taking a nap, it's time to wake up. So we're going to use you. So here is the question, and I'm not sure if you guys can see. I know we can't see it, but I think the people on the audience can see it. So during a rain event, let me see there. I got it. Okay, there we go. During a rain event, would water collected in the pit be considered processed or stormwater? And I had to really take that question. It was a lot wordier, so I had to kind of really break it down.
We're a
So
little bit wordy.
did I? Well, that's okay. But did I ask the question right?
Think you need a little more elaboration.
All right,
The
so
pit
go
can
ahead.
be used for different things. So say a pit is used as part of a cleaning process, and in that process, that pit is used to contain and convey residual material and wash waters. During a rain event, would that water collected in the pit be considered process or stormwater?
Okay. See, that is well over 50 characters. So I could not
It is,
have done
it is.
that. So,
That's the beauty of compliance.
yeah.
It's always over
okay.
50
So
characters.
the answers were processed water, stormwater, drinkable, or high quality H2O. And if you recognize any movie references that we make, I will send you a special prize at the end. So we found out yesterday we reference like 7 different movies, and they're all over the board. So send it in. Okay, so I'm gonna close it. I'm gonna share the answer so you guys can't see it. But 61% said process. 39% said stormwater. Nobody said high quality H2O. Kind of sad.
The majority would be correct. It would
All
be
right,
considered
61%.
processed water.
And why is that a trick question? So 40% saying stormwater is.
And no, it's a common misconception. Because that pit is used as part of your process, any stormwater that comes in contact with that process then becomes considered process. So to alleviate that, put a cover over your process, or prohibit run-on from coming into that pit so that you don't have that commingling.
So complicated.
Yeah, redirecting water is the key to
Engineering
separate
controls
process from storm. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a lot of words.
It is a lot of words. We're not going to bore you by reading them all to you. We're just going to highlight a couple of them.
So non-stormwater discharges, there's a finite number of them that are allowed under the general permit, roughly 10, give or take. But one of the things that I wanted to kind of mention is, something that I've seen on numerous occasions is washing of buildings and sidewalks, which is considered an allowable non-stormwater discharge. However, it has to be done without chemicals and detergents.
I was going to say, you can use some serious acid on those sidewalks.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and people do. People use, what is that?
Muriatic
acid. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm surprising myself today. I'm impressing a lot of our listeners who know me. But they're going, dang.
And I can't tell you how many times I've had a maintenance supervisor or groundskeeper come and say, "Hey, we're going to do this activity and we're going to use this product." And I'm like, "Oh, we can't do that." He's like, "Well, but look, it says environmentally friendly and biodegradable." And my response is always going to be, "That's fine if you want to use that. Let's just throw a drain mat down and let's collect that water as you're doing the washes. And then once you're done with that, let's pump it out and put it in the grass and now water our grass." 9 times out of 10, they just forego using
false
the chemical.
advertising.
Yeah. Yep. Oh, another thing I want to mention is condensate. In regards to air compressors. On average, an air compressor condensate contains 300 parts per million. So, we need to be cognizant of that, especially if that condensate drains to the ground or to the POTW for that matter. So now industry kind of hit to that, and POTWs and agencies have become aware of that factoid. So now a lot of industries are installing oil water separators to manage their condensate so that they can proceed with being an allowable discharge again.
Well, it's very nice that they let us sprinkle our lawns and saying that that's non-stormwater discharges that are allowed.
So we just wanted to highlight high level some, we'll call them unique circumstances that might apply to your facility depending on where your discharge ends up. There's just a couple caveat, some of them are actually not allowed. Some of them require you to, for example, notify the Edwards Aquifer Authority if your discharge runs into there. So there's lots of detail in that permit once again. Just keep in mind, especially if you're in the Austin area, San Antonio, in the Edwards Aquifer contributing recharge zone, there's additional requirements that could apply to you, or you may need to submit your plan to the authority. Another Texas-wide potential issue that you might run into is just making sure you know, and you're required to do this when you submit your application, but making sure you know which body of water your discharge gets to, because we have a little bit of dirty water in Texas, and there could be some limits or restrictions on what you can allow in your water that breaches that water body, depending on if it's impaired for, bacteria, etc.
Okay, so you might have already said this, but who is in charge of this stormwater in Texas?
TCEQ.
Okay, so do different cities have, in municipalities, have different rules that that they say, hey, we have a special circumstances, so like in the Edwards Aquifer, I mean, or is it just pretty much it's a blanket across the state, you're good?
There are city ordinances for some items, but typically they mirror the state and the federal rules.
I think SAWS and I think TCQ is designated authority to SAWS in San Antonio for implementing this permit.
And that's why I was thinking about that, is because we don't have SAWS everywhere, because of course it's San Antonio water, but but I was wondering why we don't have
now,
DAWs.
cities will inspect. Dallas definitely. Dallas and Fort Worth, they're very active. They're inspecting their inspections.
Okay. Big book.
That's a big book. That is your stormwater plan. There is a lot to this document. Yes, it's a big book. Don't just throw it on your shelf and ignore it and let it get dusty.
Have you seen that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. I can feel it on my fingers just thinking about it.
You go to open it, you can't even. The pages haven't even been.
So they do it. So they do it in 5 years, and then they don't just
look
put
at
it
it.
Look right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I like to consider the SWIP as having two parts to me anyway. One of them is there's a lot of detailed information required by the permit for inspectors, and that they're going to go in and pull that book off the shelf, hopefully it won't be dusty, and they're going to go through line by line and check that you're following the permit. The more important piece, well, I wouldn't say more important, you want to make sure that it follows the rules, but a very important piece of it though is it is meant to be guidelines and a living document to track what's going on at your site. Because I think we all know that facilities are going to change. They're not static. They're not the same every day.
Well, I'm sure pallets are moved.
Pallets are moved.
So
rocks are moved around. Trucks are loaded. Yeah. So the whole point of having this SWIP is to update it when changes are made. So we're going to go into inspections and sampling later on, but there are requirements in this SWIP and this permit that you update your BMPs, your best management practices, or you update your procedures based on what actually is happening at your site. And those inspections and sample results, et cetera, are the items, the tools that you can use to monitor what's going on at your site.
It should always be reflective of current site conditions.
So that's if an auditor comes in and grabs your book and it's dusty, that's number one, something's wrong. Number two is that you're not working it. I mean, so how can you be working your plan if you can't even probably find your plan? Have you ever found that?
I've seen that, just an internal inspection. I went out to a site and the book was, I think the rings were open in the binder and the pages were falling out, and he didn't know where his inspections were. And imagine if that had been the TCQ or the city. That means they're going to really dig as much as they can, because it's a very clear indication that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
okay. I want to launch the poll first.
Okay.
Because, it's like we're giving them the answers and we're launching the poll, and then,
You don't want to cheat.
I want to really test our audience, right? Okay. So okay. So sorry, audience, but I'm going to. Okay, so who can be on your stormwater team? Okay,
I'm
So-
afraid to hear his answers.
Anyone? Yeah, because this was mine. This was my question. I created this. Anyone can be on it. Only qualified trained personnel, EHS managers. I think there's another one, but I can't. Anyway, but you know what else I just thought of? Hopefully I got the right answer right. That would be kind of embarrassing. You're like, well, that's a great question, Lance,
We'll blame it on
but
you, Lance. It's all
there
right.
actually is not the right answer on. Okay, so they're answering. Ooh,
You have a little bit of a trick question there,
Yeah.
just so you know.
really?
Yeah.
Ooh, sorry, but that's actually good.
hmm
All right, so we're going to give a few more seconds. I'm going to close it, and I'm going to share. Okay, so 26% said anyone, and 74% said only qualified trained personnel. There is a trick question there because anybody can be trained, correct?
Anyone can be trained.
So, but you still have to be trained.
You still have to be trained. Yes, that qualified personnel is the key
Key.
phrase,
Yeah.
and they have that actually written out in the stormwater permit. And really, there's no actual certification. I mean, there are companies out there that there's plenty of stormwater certifications you can get. We actually have training this fall. We call it our qualified personnel training. It's a full day of training. We take you through the entire permit, what should be in the SWIP, sampling, et cetera. So then you can take that and either implement it in the field or go train additional people at your company. That's a good training.
Yeah, and it's a day.
It's a day. Mhm.
Yeah, and it's like 6 hours, so it's not. Or is it longer than
6
that?
to 8.
6 to 8.
Depends on how many questions.
So if you don't ask questions, it's 6, but that's not what we want. So, okay, so hide. Okay. Establish the right team. So I kind of threw you guys off. So here we're on establishing the right team. Who's taking this one?
Yeah, so it's important to have the right people on your team. I feel like all too often some sites delegate everything to the EHS manager, the EHS coordinator, and there he is running around trying to grab samples and trying to do inspections when really, you assign the right roles to the right people. Who has authority or influence over a certain area that really is the area that's causing potential pollutants to impact the stormwater. So it's having a good, well-rounded team with people that are familiar with the site, familiar with the SWIP, and familiar with the regulations. And that's.
If you
Have good
run
teams.
across who shouldn't be on the team,
Someone who's not trained.
Someone who's not,
Someone-
security. I feel like I've seen facilities designate security especially for those operations that are 24 hours.
Mhm.
You have a skeleton crew at night. They're typically your ops people and they're indoors and all of a sudden a rain event happens and let's have the security guard do it. Well, I've only been at a couple facilities where the security guard was an actual employee and not some third party.
Mhm.
And so here we're having this third party guy who really has no
because
idea.
yeah,
about
if
our
he does it
operations.
wrong,
Right.
what's the
It's
repercussions
on
on
the
him?
company.
Yeah.
It's not on that guard or his company.
So
or her
yes, I
company.
have seen the wrong person collecting.
So what happens if you're not at your facility and it does rain? I mean, you're supposed to put on your robe and go take a water sample, or
I mean, that's why you have more
plan.
than one person on your stormwater team.
Mhm.
You have somebody there that's going to
Dang.
be there on each shift, or you are relegated as having to put on your robe and slippers.
how
and go.
often do you have to do that? I mean, you're like,
We have people at our company that do that for
You do?
companies.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Generally, it's quarterly, so it's not like you have to go
I haven't
out.
been trained on that.
We can train you. Generally, it's quarterly. You don't. One of the questions I always get is, do I have to go out there every single time it rains? And no, you don't. So it's one rain per your sampling period, or one rainfall event per your sampling period. If that makes sense. So
Mhm.
you're not running out every time it rains.
Right.
Okay.
Once you've satisfied that one, then you're good.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't put it off and hope, okay, well, these last two storm events have been at night and hope that the next one is going to be during the day, because then you may have
Right.
run through your quarter and
Mhm.
all the storm events have been at night.
Okay, so it's obviously very important to know what sector you're in. One of the first things I like to say to people, which seems like it would be common sense, is read your permit, because it's real easy to just look at that slip and go. It's important to understand what is in the main section of the permit and what is in your sector, because like we said, it goes from A through AD, so that's a ton of sectors, and
30,
each
yeah.
one has its own separate requirements. And sometimes they're broken down within each sector. For example, Sector E has cement and concrete manufacturing along with a couple others, and it adds effluent limits for cement. It requires monthly inspections for a ready mix site, where in the main body of the permit, the initial requirement is quarterly inspection. So for Sector E, for example, or even Sector J for mining, they require a monthly inspection. So, if you don't read your sector, you've got a full year, you only have 4 inspections, you should have 12 because you didn't read the details in your sector.
So know your Victor.
Know your Victor, yes.
Roger. See, we're quoting movies all the time. We love it. Okay. Sorry, I am switched now. I know that we have, but usually I'm looking at one. Now I'm looking at that one, and it's throwing me off. I'm usually looking at my computer, and now I'm looking at the wall monitor. So sorry for the delay. Compliance inspections.
Fun stuff. I know, right? So depending on how often you have your inspections, quarterly or monthly, depending on your sector, the important piece here is that you're actually getting out, walking around, taking a look at your site, and making notes. So I've seen a lot of checks. Yes, everything's perfect month after month, quarter after quarter. And we know that's not true. Mm-hmm. Inspectors know that's not true. I've had actuals, I think it was a City of Dallas inspector and probably TCQ too, say they don't want to see that because they know better. And if you just have yes checked, yes, everything's perfect, they're just going to assume you're not out there walking around. They want to see that you're looking at things, making notes, and then fixing them. I think that's the other key, is actually fixing and documenting that the fix has been done.
Don't pencil whip it.
Don't pencil whip it. Yeah. And don't, fill it out and make a photocopy and then sign every month. We've seen that too.
That's ridiculous. Come on. I mean, I know that we actually have
give them kudos for being efficient. But
It was efficient.
I think we have actual TCQ people on. I bet they can tell us a lot of fun stories.
I'm sure there's a lot of stories.
So you can send us your stories, and we'll keep them confidential. And don't pencil whip it. We'll know.
Yeah, don't pencil whip it. So on this note, I want to talk about documentation a little bit. We had an inspection at a site once, and the inspector came in and made notes about dust and other pollutants on the site. And we went back after the fact and realized that he hadn't seen any of our watering logs, any of our sweeping logs. So we sent, and these guys were keeping them. They weren't made after the fact or anything. They were keeping regular logs, regular documentation. And when we sent them back to the TCQ, he removed those comments from his inspection and removed violations from our inspection, the TCQ inspection. So it's just an example of how important this documentation is, because I've also heard inspectors say if they don't see documentation, they're going to assume your site's been the same for 50 years. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's very, very important.
And to keep it organized and and readily available.
Mm-hmm. Don't be like that guy that was pulling papers from everywhere trying to show me where his stuff was. Yeah.
So how big are the fines generally? I don't know. I'm just being curious. I'm being nosy.
Yeah. I've seen, and it depends, I've seen anywhere from 3 to 5 to 10. I think Vanessa said it was 10,000 a day per violation. Your cap,
the max.
The max.
That's like the max.
Yeah.
Dang.
And they will
I've never seen it, but
knock on wood, I haven't either. Well, not for stormwater. I've seen they will take additional violations. For example, if you have an effluent limit and you've violated your pH month after month without fixing it, that becomes a factor. That adds money to your fine. But
repeat violations are
never
a good thing.
Don't repeat.
A day, though.
A day. Mm-hmm.
All right, compliance sampling. So there are several types of sampling events. There's samples taken. There's your benchmarks, your annual medals, and your quarterly visuals. So we won't get too much into that. Some things we want to mention are when you are taking your samples is be cognizant of when you need to take that sample. Obviously, you need to take that during a qualified storm event. And what qualifies as a qualified storm event is there has to be actual discharge from your facility, and it can't be preceded, or there couldn't have been a previous storm event 72 hours prior to this one that you're about to sample.
Okay,
Does that
back
make sense?
that up
Yeah.
a little bit. So, okay, so 72. So you can't sample after a major storm that happened 72 hours previously.
A previous stormwater event, correct?
Mhm.
So say again, your 24-hour facility. Actually, you don't have to need to be a 24-hour. So there was a rain that happened, a significant rain event, storm event that happened
On a Monday.
right, Monday night, and nobody was there to take it. So
It rains Thursday.
It rains Tuesday.
Okay.
We can't sample that one, or you can't sample that one because
It'd be diluted or
correct. Like everything that's already that potentially could have been a pollutant sitting out in your yard has now been washed away because it was just preceded by.
Yeah, it's no longer representative.
Was
that
no longer
way.
representative of your site conditions, correct?
okay.
Yeah. Another thing, kind of tips and tricks is and things that I've witnessed in terms of maybe areas of noncompliance is when you're sampling, a lot of times people have a sample jar that they're taking the samples and then transfer that contents to the jar that's going to be sent off to the lab. You can't do that for oil and grease. Oil and grease is a grab sample, and that sample has to be taken with the jar that's going to be sent off to the lab. Have to be cognizant of the analysis that require preservatives such as metals. So you can't, make sure that you're using the right jar for sampling.
So now I can kind of see why you probably need to be trained on a lot of this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Taking a water sample doesn't seem that complicated to me, but
There's a lot of
I would
there's
screw
lots
this
to
up.
do.
Into it.
Just hold time on the samples. You
Yeah.
can only you have to submit your sample to the lab within a certain amount of time per different types of samples. So it's not the same across the board, or that sample doesn't really
It'll be flagged
count. Yeah, it'll be flagged. That doesn't count.
at a whole time.
Speaking
Okay.
of sending samples to the lab, I had some. So you're supposed to submit your jars come in a cooler, and you're supposed to send your cooler back to the lab with ice on it. So I've had people use, and I didn't think about it till this happened, but they used actual ice. And what does ice do? It melts. So they sent it through FedEx, and they called me up and said the FedEx guy was freaking out because they had this leaking package. So they took it back to the site, and we missed our whole time on those samples, and those samples weren't valid. So I think most labs will send, like the blue ice that you put in your lunches with their sample coolers. So that is the key. They do need to be kept cold, but don't use ice. And if you do have to, waterproof that thing so it doesn't leak. Because UPS, FedEx, Postal Service, they don't like leaking packages.
Yeah.
Obvious, right?
Yeah. Okay, so the weather in Texas is at best. I can't even think of the word.
Texas?
Yeah.
4 seasons in one day?
Well, yeah. So
Unpredictable.
Unpredictable. Yeah, I was going to say, psychotic, but yeah, unpredictable, right? So you won't get rain for sometimes 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then when you do get rain, it ain't messing around, and it's severe. So you don't want to be, so you're supposed to be going out there, with your jars, without preservatives and all that stuff while there's a tornado, in the area. I'm kind of being facetious, but is there, next thing you know,
you want to be aware of dangerous conditions. You're not required to go out there if there's truly dangerous conditions. And in the event that there is a dangerous condition, you just note in your file there were dangerous conditions that prohibited you from collecting a sample. And so say that was your only stormwater, but like you said, it's preceded by 4 weeks, and we have another.
And then it's in and it's out, and then it's gone.
Right, and then it's gone. So you just have to take that. You have to then attempt to have 2 sampling events in the next quarter.
Okay. We're not talking about puddles of water. We're talking about running water.
You should have an actual outfall point at your site where water runs off.
Okay.
Correct. Now, don't abuse that either. I mean, I had a site where the previous manager before I was noting dangerous conditions for months, years, and that doesn't fly. That's not and we're a 24-hour facility, so I'm.
Come on.
Yeah. So eventually we got dinged on that, and we had to install an automatic sampler. So it's dangerous. Well, then there are other ways. There are ways to get around that.
And I'm sure. I was kind of being facetious a little bit with, with safety. You always want to think safety, but that could be.
It's valid.
Oh,
you
yeah,
don't want to
absolutely.
Lightning, I think,
Lightning.
might be more of an issue that happens more often here in Texas.
Mhm.
Well, I don't know, tornadoes. Yeah, please, the TCQ does not want you to sample in a tornado.
Right.
Unless you're Thor. See another movie. So
Another movie.
okay. I had a good one about Oompa Loompas, but then that just didn't. I was like, you don't want to take samples, and the next thing you know, you're in the land of Oompa Loompas. But then we realized that
It's the
Oompa
Munchkins.
is the Munchkins. Yes. So actually, there's 2 movies there. Can you name them?
Are you asking me or the audience?
I don't know. Maybe I should. Do you know them? Okay. If you know them, then don't say. So yes.
Oh, real quick, a couple more items
Oh,
on the,
sorry,
on the
Matt.
sampling.
There's a lot on the sampling.
Cross contamination. One is dirty gloves. We had a maintenance guy who was in charge of taking samples during the night shift, and he used his dirty maintenance gloves to collect the sample. You're going to have some cross contamination with that.
Again, that's why we train. You have to be qualified personnel. This middle picture here I think it's a green cap from a video that the Washington Department of Ecology has. So we just were talking about outfalls. So generally you're going to have a discrete outfall where water flows. But, there are certain occasions when you'll have what they call sheet flow sampling. And for the longest time, I was at a loss on how to do that until we found this cool video on the Department of Ecology's website. And they have, if you Google it, they show you some really good techniques on how to get a more direct flow from a sheet flow. Because, sheet flow is usually shallow water running across a wide area. It's hard to stick a jar in that and get a sample.
Sometimes, so right here, what he's doing in the pictures, he's creating a little berm to collect that sample. You can also, if you are on a bit of a slope, dig a little hole, make a little impression, and collect your sample that way. Just making sure that the jar lip is above the hole indentation that you created, so that you're collecting a representative sample and not getting turbulence from when the water falls and tumbles with the,
want
with
dirt
the
from
ground.
that hole.
Exactly. Yeah.
And just one more quick thing, just because I've seen it happen, we had someone actually walk through their discharge channel and stir up all the dirt. So their solid sample was very high from all the dirt that they actually stirred up walking through. And if they had just, walked to the side of the channel, it would have been much more representative of what's flowing off the site. So just, be aware of your sampling points and how you're getting there.
And not to harp on the training, I mean, the reason some of these are done is so that we then make improvements. So here we're kicking up dirt, or it's turbulent, and now it's cloudy. Our sample's cloudy. Well, we have to then decide, well, where is this coming from? What is the pollutant? Well, I don't know. Joe Schmo here just dinged us up, but I mean that's not a good something that you're going to write in your slip.
Right. We still had to report that, and then we did retraining.
Yeah,
that was our solution.
You have to document your observation, and if your observation is I have a turbid and cloudy, has a lot of debris. Well, why?
Yeah.
So everybody is sending these samples to labs and getting all the stuff. I mean, that's
not always. So visual, you have different samples. So there's benchmark samples and your annual metals. Those get sent off to the lab. Your quarterly visuals, you're taking a jar, filling that with water, and you're looking at it. What do you see? Do you smell anything? Do you see an oil sheen? Is it turbid? Do you have plastic pellets that floated off from one of your stockpiles or drums or what have you? Yeah.
Very good. I feel like I'm going to be going through the training. Actually,
do you feel qualified now?
Do you feel qualified?
I'm getting there.
So one of the things we wanted to highlight is this update with the new permit. You've taken your samples based on your sector. Again, know your sector. So if you are required to submit a DMR, there are certain sectors. Okay, let me step this back. What is a DMR? A DMR is a discharge monitoring report. It's where you would report the results of your sampling to the TCQ. They are now requiring originally it was effective December 2016. It's now this September 1st, 2018. They had some delays implementing the new online system. In fact, I think even Harvey played a role in that, according to their website. So, yeah. And
everything gets blamed on Harvey.
Everything gets blamed on Harvey.
Judy, Harvey.
I know. So they are now using the EPA Net DMR website. That was another change. We have a link at the end of this presentation So, March 31st, that name in lights down there, or name, that date, that date in lights down there, that is your permitting deadline. It's March 31st the following year. So, we're in calendar year 2018. So March 31st, 2019 is when all of your sampling results are due. So I will clarify, most sectors would only need to submit a DMR for hazardous metals if they exceeded one of the limits. There are a few sectors that have their own effluent limits versus benchmarks, and it's all written out in your sector. Cement, for example, has an effluent limit. They would be required to submit that DMR by March 31st. Is that enough acronyms and letters?
I think so. And dates.
And dates, right? The other date here, and it's already passed, so you just know that you have to submit it electronically. All of your NOIs, NOTs, NOC, so it's your application, your NOI, a notice of termination, a notice of change, your no exposure, they all have to be submitted online as well. Mm-hmm. And you can get a waiver. You can submit for a waiver to submit these. You can ask for a waiver to submit these items on paper still, but I don't know.
They're really pushing. They're really pushing for the e-permitting.
It's just
system.
easier.
Yeah, it is.
So
millennials,
if you didn't get all that, just call Jennifer and Vanessa, and they'll figure it out for you. And
common issues. We talked about lack of rainfall. I mean, in Texas again, weather's unpredictable, and that's a common issue. But there's some times that if you are a 24-hour facility, however, you have to ensure that you are getting those samples during the quarter. Similarly, rain during the night. One thing I will mention that I've personally fubbed on is forgetting to keep up with the rain gauge logs. Mm-hmm. That's been in effect for, I guess, the last 10 years. We're trying to.
I think at least 10.
At least 10. And I still forget. It's
that it's not a daily, but it feels like an almost daily requirement.
Right.
So it's easy to forget.
And it is if it's raining.
Yeah, it is.
So it's a once a week requirement, mm-hmm. and once a day when it's raining. Because again, not every storm is going to result in discharge. Not every rain event is going to be a qualified storm event. And this mm-hmm. is to help you determine, is this a qualified event? I will say, when you are installing your rain gauge, careful where you put it. Don't put it next to the sprinklers.
Or next to your roof.
Or next to your roof, your rain gutters. Yeah.
So another thing that actually tripped me up a long time ago when I was a baby environmental scientist is the signatory authority piece. And I've also linked this at the end, or we've also linked at the end of the presentation. The TCQ has very specific requirements for who can sign things. And it's just not something that was logical to me at first. And you realize it's because the person who's signing the NOI, the application for this permit, that person has to have monetary responsibility or control over the facility in order to implement all those BMPs and procedures in your SWIP. So there are actual specific requirements, and that person signing that application has to be that particular person. It can't be delegated. They also have specific requirements for signing your inspections. Just again, this kind of all goes back to qualified people and making sure that the people who have control are seeing these things. Now, the inspections and other reports like that, you can delegate authority. So your main signatory authority can delegate to like the plant personnel doing the inspection, for example, I believe. You just have to actually submit a letter. You can't just say, hey, you're delegated. You have to submit a letter to the TCQ that says you're delegating to this position or this name.
For signing reports.
For signing reports. Not for signing your application or your NOI. Yeah, we got tripped up on that a long time ago. Again, when I was brand new, an inspector actually pointed it out. Mm-hmm. And that's not something you want an inspector to point out.
Yeah.
that the person signing your report isn't qualified to sign your reports.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be bad.
Mm-hmm, not fun.
I tried that with checks a couple times. It didn't work either.
It ended up okay, but it was a good learning experience.
Are we going? Are we?
Yeah, almost.
Okay.
We're good. Almost done.
Oh, I mean, are we still on common issues?
Oh, no, we're good.
We're good.
All right. Sorry.
That's okay. So compliance tools. Obviously, your Outlook calendar, as rudimentary as that is a really good tool. Sending out reminders to if you have a bunch of sites, to the person responsible for the sampling or the inspections, reminding yourself when things are due, that March 31st due date. There's a lot of environmental software out there. I haven't used too much of that personally. One of the biggest things I would create is a cheat sheet for the people in the field who are actually doing the work. So you kind of combine short and sweet, because if you're only doing this quarterly or annually, you're not going to remember. I know I have to go back and look every time I'm doing a sample. So it's a good thing to have a summary with your sampling procedures, what you're sampling for, how you take your pH, for example. Just notes and cheat sheets are very, very helpful and accessible. It's easier to grab that than that giant sweat binder off the shelf.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And Vanessa, I think you had some.
Yeah, I've had experience with several of the software web-based compliance tools, and they're great because they have a lot of them are kind of act like a TurboTax in terms of like, here's your compliance, or here's, the programs that are applicable to you, but then they also have an aspect of a compliance calendar that'll send you reminders. But oftentimes you, just like your alarm, when it goes off in the morning, you snooze it and you forget. Right. So I oftentimes needed an additional backup, and it was something as rudimentary as a flip calendar, right? That I would go at the beginning of the year, mark up and say, okay, this is first quarter, make sure. And I would always try to grab my sample at the beginning of the quarter, because again, we never know what happens, and you may not be there or want to show up in the middle of the night to grab your sample in the middle of the night.
And a lot of times it's probably where you guys would be really helpful is getting systems in place. So, just, hey, I've never really done this before. We want to do it right. We're trained, but I don't know what, the day-to-day things I need to do. So that's probably where calling you guys and saying, hey, come in and at least show us how to, put stickies on calendars, because I'm sure y'all use sticky notes. You look like you would do that.
A nice compliance calendar is helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. And Nick Andriani we did a webinar last month about program management. I know they hate that word, but it's and Stormwater is a part of it, just like how we can help you with your compliance needs. Because there's a lot of dates, and there's a lot of when you were talking about dates. Piece of it. Yeah, when you were talking about dates and it was like, what? and this year it's every 2 years. And so in 16, it's about March of 19, I'm like, no. So, and you're right. That's only one part of it. So that's that's just Stormwater. That's not talking about all this other stuff.
Yeah. And and especially like the beginning, the first part of the year, the first half, where it's just reporting season, and you're in the trenches trying to get your usages and your waste reports out. And the last thing you're going to remember is, oh, did I get my benchmark? Did I get my annual medals?
Is my rain gauge right?
Right.
Yeah.
So we just wanted to link a couple helpful tools here. The TCQ Assistance Tools webpage is very nice. They link, of course, your permit. Like I said, read your permit. They have a bunch of tools and links on various ways to help you stay in compliance. The signatory authority rules are in the middle. That's what we were just talking about. And then this is the Net DMR support portal for the EPA Net DMR, since they did switch over to using the EPA Net DMR system. This is some helpful info on how to create your account.
So in conclusion, know your sector. Read the permit. Know your sector. Use your SWIP inspections and sampling as tools to improve your site. And just like any part of any facility, there's always that continuous improvement. Same applies here, continuous improvement. We want to minimize what's going into our waterways. We know here in Texas, water is a valuable resource. It's kind of limited, so we want to protect that. So at the end of the day, kind of bring that home, and use any tools available to stay in compliance. Nothing is silly. I'm a big Post-it note person. So
I knew that. I don't know why. I could only guess.
So this is that link, or this is a link to that qualified personnel training we were talking about earlier. And if you'll note that early bird date, we are coming up on the August one for Dallas. I guess it's the July 1st date for the August training. Talk about dates, Lance. These 3 sessions are our qualified personnel.
Yeah, I think.
Sessions.
We have. I think there's. I want to say it's either $50 or $100 discount if you sign up before July 1st. So good timing
We're getting
on
there.
getting.
Mhm.
It's gone fast.
Isn't that Sunday, I think?
It is Sunday.
Mhm.
Yeah, July 4th, Wednesday. So, and then here is our next webinar next month on tips for wastewater treatment. So I had to plug that in for David McAllister because it's probably not going to be as popular as your stormwater, but you know, it's a big deal.
It is.
So,
Mhm.
and it's on July 26th, and of course, it's complimentary, it's free, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Our webinars are getting more and more fun. You're not thinking so, but I am thinking so. So
It's all Lance.
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for. We don't have any questions from our audience, and we're right at 57 minutes. So
Great.
that's really good because I was thinking,
Yeah.
man, this is gonna be a fast one, and y'all did well, very well.
We have a lot
Proud
to
of you.
say.
Y'all were nervous, and y'all did so well. You act like you've done it hundreds of times. So we'll get ready for the next one. So thank you guys for joining us, and
Thanks,
if you have any questions for these two, let me know, and we will make sure that they get answered. You guys have a great holiday weekend. Well, I guess it is a holiday weekend, but not quite, is it? Does it count Wednesday? Wednesday holidays are the bummers,
They're the
man.
worst. Yeah.
All right. Y'all have a great week.